that you're not just estimating.
Everyone agrees assessment is essential.
And I want you to mark it using those criteria we've seen before.
But the education world is divided about what it should be for and how to do it. Over the past 20 years, assessment in England has been dominated by summative testing and league tables, designed to drive up standards and make schools accountable.
Which makes it more tense.
But many believe that a shift away from testing towards formative assessment in the classroom would be a far more effective way to raise achievement.
It's fundamentally about, did the children just learn what I just taught? If not, why not?
They claim that using assessment for learning, or AFL, the system where teachers monitor and adjust their teaching in response to how well students have understood the lesson, would boost learning more than any other form of assessment.
Sodium hydroxide.
But turning AFL theory into practice has proved a minefield. Recently, the government's own Assessment for Learning strategy, APP, or Assessing Pupils' Progress, has further complicated the debate.
Well, in theory, I think it's a great idea. In practice, where are we possibly going to file their work?
It's a learning curve. I think when anybody comes across something that is new, it's going to be difficult at first. And I just think it's trial and error. I'm not saying we're getting it right, but we are having a go.
So how well are AFL and APP working in our schools? And do they complement or contradict each other? In 1998, a leading advocate of assessment for learning, Dylan William, along with Professor Paul Black, published Inside the Black Box. Based on extensive research, they argued the education system would be revolutionised if their ideas were put into practice.
Governments were keen to improve education, but they were never focusing on the thing that really matters, which is what is happening day in, day out in every classroom. Getting teachers to pay more attention to what their children had actually learned, to help them make adjustments to that, to their teaching, probably would improve student learning by more than anything else that we'd ever come across. And in retrospect, it's an incredibly obvious idea. Children do not learn what we teach. Teachers teach these brilliant lessons, but when you take in the kids' exercise books, you realise that they weren't actually learning what we thought we were teaching. We find it far less...
But over the last decade, assessment for learning has struggled to gain a strong foothold in English schools.
So the idea that teachers are invested in this...
The problem has been turning theory into practice.
Today, the focus is on implementation. How do you support more teachers in making more use of minute-by-minute and day-by-day formative assessment in their classroom? Schools have tended to go for the easy bits. So compiling spreadsheets that show how kids are progressing is a very easy thing to do. But actually changing the practice of the teachers in the classroom is very, very much harder.
For Dylan William, the key to AFL is for students to understand exactly what they're learning and for teachers to use astute questioning and assessment techniques that help move learners forward.
In the 1998 review, Paul Black and I said that what was really important was students were given feedback by way of comments rather than scores or grades. But even where schools have adopted that, they've tended to give comments that are about what was missing or deficient about the last piece of work, not what you need to do to make the next piece of work better. Somebody once described that as the difference between having a medical and a post-mortem. And the trouble is that much of the feedback that children get in our classrooms are post-mortems, not medical diagnoses of what they need to do next to carry on improving.
Another key component of AFL is to empower students to become owners of their own learning.
The idea is that children should be helping each other learn. It brings in ideas of self-assessment and peer assessment, but it's also a much broader idea that encompasses collaborative learning, so that they are confident, autonomous learners.
After the Black Box was published, Dylan William oversaw an AFL pilot, which helped to refine the practice. But since then, many schools have found it hard to fully adopt the ideas. One exception is Cater Park in Beckenham.
OK, girls, the final thing I want you to do today is I want you to take 3 Post-its each from...
Here, chemistry teacher Kate Camion-Smith is using an AFL technique to gauge how well the students have understood her lesson.
Third post-it, something you still don't understand, or if you understood everything, something you want to know more about, OK? So on the post-it, I want you to write that down. I also want you to put your name on the bottom of it. Is there anybody who does not understand what they need to do? OK?
The school fully adopted AFL 4 years ago. Since then, GCSE results have risen by 20%, and they claim AFL has been a major factor.
Stuck it on, make sure you move back.
The initiative has been led by Assistant Head Sally Kelly.
We started with really some of the more simple areas, which are making sure that learning intentions are really, really clear, and really trying to make sure that we involve all the learners. And so really that's about questioning strategies, making sure, for example, that teachers give students time to answer questions. Things like post-it notes so that teachers can, in real time, check if students have understood a key question. We also made it easier for teachers by giving them sort of goodie bags, if you like, of the things that they actually needed.
The first whiteboard I see holding it up will get a point for that round.
Because obviously teachers are very busy, and if you can ease their planning in any way, it's obviously going to make something more successful. The other thing that we needed to make sure that we were really working on was peer and self-assessment.
So 10 divided by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
That's right. 10 divided by 5 is 2.
The AFL theory is that peer assessment helps student engagement and deepens their understanding.
Granny, what do I do when outliners...
We also spoke to the students about what they were doing. They feel more empowered by it. And we feel now we're marching forward to make sure that teachers really are, in real time, taking notice of the things that they're checking in lessons and changing what they do.
But few schools have adapted easily to AFL. And even some of the most experienced teachers have found it difficult to master.
Through researching it, I've kind of discovered, and I think most teachers now know, that if you are being observed by Ofsted, you should do a little bit of peer assessment. And, you know, that will tick the AFL box quite nicely. Of course, this means that nobody's practice has changed in any way, shape or form, OK? We just know how to respond to it just about for Ofsted's purposes.
And teachers, for their part, need to accept that responsibility. They need to be...
At a 2009 conference on testing and assessment, AFL was high on the agenda.
19th century.
Attending were senior figures from across the educational establishment.
It looks simple. It is not simple, but it's perfectly doable, and the benefits are well attested to. We've got to encourage a culture where...
Professor Mary James headed up the influential Learning How to Learn project. A key finding was that 80% of teachers were struggling to put AFL into practice.
On to reading, writing and mathematics.
Matthew Portal, London Borough of Newham. And I find going around just normal schools, not ones necessarily involved in research projects and doing special initiatives of various kinds, that it's actually very rare indeed to see a really first-class assessment for learning-based lesson.
You're absolutely right. We worked with 40 schools, and we looked at what was happening in those 40 schools, 1,500 teachers. And to be honest, we thought only 20% of the teachers had captured what we called the spirit of assessment for learning.
OK, the next one is apples.
The difficulty for teachers is that AFL techniques require a great deal of precision if they're to ensure deeper student learning.
9, and it's this group down the front again.
Teachers also needed to understand the principles, if you like, that underpin those practices, because they could become ritualistic and mechanistic if teachers just took some ideas and then sprinkled them throughout their lessons. A particular example might be clarifying learning objectives at the beginning of the lesson. And many teachers in schools would write their learning objective on the board. Well, after a short period of time, that becomes invisible.
Looking back, Dylan William accepts that changing mindsets was far more challenging than he anticipated.
I think that we were hopelessly naive back in the 1990s about how difficult it would be to secure these kinds of changes across a system. And every time we think we've actually got the answers, we realise that there's another even bigger question that we haven't answered in terms of helping people do this at scale. At the other extreme...
He now believes the answer to implementing AFL lies with sharply focused in-school training and teacher collaboration in what he calls teacher learning communities.
And it's not a top-down model at all. It's about somebody becoming a member of this teacher learning community to get support of the rest of the group for the things that they want to change about their practice. What we do know is that I think that 75 minutes per month is a minimum for this. Schools have tried to split the meetings, schools have tried to do it in different kinds of ways, and it rarely works as well. 75 minutes once a month appears to be the minimum.
In May 2008, the government launched its own AFL strategy and came up with a completely new system called Assessing Pupil Progress. APP gives teachers improvement criteria linked to national standards, so they can create detailed profiles of students' strengths and weaknesses. The government argued that teachers can use this information to adjust their teaching and help improve performance. Backed by £150 million of government funding over 3 years, APP has been developed by a range of organisations, including the QCDA. One of the driving forces behind its introduction was Dr. Sue Horner.
Teachers say, this is the bit that we've been looking for. It completes the picture. We've got a curriculum, we've got the end of key stage assessments, we have to think about how pupils are getting on day to day. This is the bit in the middle that we've been looking for. They also say that the criteria have given them a new way of thinking about what they're teaching, and they say that they find that really useful.
APP has been piloted in English, Maths and Science at Key Stages 2 and 3. South Camden Community School in North London was one of the schools taking part.
This particular assessment focus covers these 4 areas, these 4 skills.
In this Year 8 lesson, the focus will be on APP criteria designed to help students improve presentation and group work skills.
OK? It's about looking at how valid you think your evidence is, and also about scientists working together. Now that you've got these statements which help you to kind of focus in on what level a student is, it means that within the department it's been quite helpful for different levels of experience. So now we're marking more consistently.
Million kilometres.
The diameter at the equator is 2,324 kilometres.
Because it is so small, it's classified as a dwarf planet.
Pluto has 3 known moons called Charon.
Some of the students are quite enjoying APP because we're being quite creative with what we're doing in class. And there's lots more things going on that we wouldn't normally be doing.
It's a massive 247.7 years.
Thank you for listening.